Hi, guys. Thanks for all coming on to this call today. I just wanted to get us all in one place. We're going to be doing this more often, it seems like, but we just wanted to get on and answer a bunch of questions that some of the consumers are having lately, as well as just address some of the topics that it seems like people want to know a lot more about, so that everyone who's listening understands where the perspectives are coming from and a little bit about who you guys are. If you guys just want to introduce yourselves one at a time here and just say your name and your title of where you guys are at and where you work here. Will, let's start with you.
Sure, sure, absolutely. Thank you, Stephen. It's Will West. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Tesseract Life Sciences, which owns Advanced Powder Dynamics.
Excellent. Thank you, Will. I'm Uli Landauer. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Tesseract Life Sciences. I oversee the marketing and commercialization efforts on Tesseract Life Sciences and of its three subsidiaries, Tesseract Medical Research, finished products, Biotest, which is wholesale ingredients, as well as Advanced Powder Dynamics. And today we are specifically talking about Advanced Powder Dynamics.
Good morning and thank you, Stephen. My name is Hendrik Grobler and I'm the Chief Operations Officer here at Advanced Powder Dynamics in Payson, Arizona. We do product development and I'm in charge of the product development facility and also on the production facility. And we're also the production arm for Tesseract manufacturing with Tesseract Medical Research.
Awesome. And I think that's such a really great spread of perspectives here, because I think we have from Will, obviously, we have the more CEO, entrepreneurial, kind of the consumer on that side of things type of perspective. From Uli, obviously, we've got a little bit more of the direct to consumer kind of marketing and more personal aspect of things. And then Hendrik, I'm really excited to hear some of the more technical aspects of things as you're on a lot of the operations. So without further ado, let's get into the questions. So first question is going to be, what are the main advantages of choosing custom spray drying over standard processing methods for my specific product formulation?
Okay. I'll answer that question, and then Will and Uli can also jump in. I think it is the ability to customize and design a formulation based on the product objectives. So that, for example, is what delivery system is required and so forth, and then also the specific powder characteristic requirements. Those are things like particle size, flowability, density of the product, and the ability of your CMO or your development partner to differentiate between these objectives and having the exceptional spray drying technology to differentiate between our technology and what other technologies are out there. For example, you need to have a clear understanding of how the liquid properties, and that's the initial product that you're starting to work with, how, for example, the solids concentration, the viscosity of the material, the temperature requirements of the material, how that will influence the final product or the powder property requirements. If you don't have a good understanding of that, then your project is going to fail. Also, you have to have access to the latest technology. There are a lot of technologies out there. You have to find somebody that knows the technology and knows what the latest technology is that will comply to these different formulation requirements. Particle engineering is a very important part of that development process, and the customer or the CMO need to understand your specific requirements for particle engineering and how to apply formulation technologies and also the different particle engineering technologies that's available there. APD has a technology that we call dynamic atomization, and this technology supports all current formulation technologies out there, and it also has the ability to provide or to comply to all the requirements that you need for particle engineering. And that is if you have specific particle size requirements, particle density requirements, flowability requirements, all of these are critical with regards to the end product. And our technology focuses on these requirements. And we also have a proven record to show that we have done, or that we have achieved these requirements for, I would say, more than 200 different products in the last 20 years.
Wow.
Your question, Stephen, is about customization
Yeah.
and custom spray drying contrasted with more mainstream spray drying.
Hmm.
It really depends upon the end goal of the project, the company, and in many ways, the ingredient.
Hmm.
If your aspiration is to achieve the lowest cost with a commodity product, the mainstream spray drying approach is most likely very applicable. There's a commodity market and a very known set of dryers and common technology that's built to suit for that, and it's easily accessible. On the other hand, if you have unique needs, you have unusual products that you're working with, or you have unusual business goals or diversified and segmented market, then you have to look for a more targeted or customized solution. There is a way to align strategic, technical, and financial goals if you want to pursue a highly customized solution. There are far fewer options in that scenario or scenarios. But
Hmm.
if you do need a highly customized solution, then there are capabilities, for example, the dynamic atomization technology, where you can do very rapid prototyping and you can do several iterations with an ingredient in a very short time span. And you can understand the alternatives to do different drying, different additives approaches with that ingredient. You can take one core ingredient and understand different possibilities to create different SKUs, to take that one core ingredient into different marketplaces with different needs. You can take that one core ingredient into different geographies as a result.
Hmm.
And a business can pursue global strategies with differentiated segments as a result in very short order, which aligns the corporate strategy, the financial strategies, and diversified outcomes, which satisfies the technical and the financial functions within a business supporting that corporate strategy. But you have to have the technical resources, the rapid innovation skill set from the dynamic atomization technology that supports it, which mainstream spray drying simply does not have. And so technical limitations in mainstream spray drying do not support the level of customization that you may need if you have certain challenging strategic or financial or market demands placed on a business. And
Hmm.
so depending upon the business needs and other needs of the business, it may drive the level of customization you need, and the technical limitations may rise to the surface. But the ability to rapidly innovate and do iterations with the product, the ability of the technology to create things like a sustained shelf life because of dynamic atomization's ability to create ultra low water activity and moisture content in the products so that it can survive in an extended supply chain environment, and so on, create unique properties that less customized solutions cannot bring to the table. And so there are considerations that go far beyond what people may generally consider when they think about customization that exist in just one or two functions within a business. I would argue that the considerations for customization span almost every function of a business, and you
Hmm.
have to look at the complete picture of the business needs and well beyond just the individual material or technical aspects from the item that's being dried itself.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's always a good idea when you are talking about customization in any industry. It seems like whether or not it's necessary, which I'm really glad that you addressed? Like, is that necessary for every single circumstance, or if there is a better, more kind of commoditized solution? I think like what you were talking about in the beginning there. So going into that, I think this actually leads into the next question that people are having really well. So how do I evaluate whether a contract how do I evaluate whether a contract spray drying company has the right equipment and expertise for the unique powder requirements that I have? So I think in this use case, it's somebody's obviously gone through that question, Will, of do I need an actual custom spray? Do I need an actual custom solution? And landing on that they obviously do. So how do you then go through and find out and address whether or not your supplier actually has the ability to do that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there are quite a few considerations, and Hendrik can talk to us about some of the technical ones. I can tell you
Mm-hmm.
some of the things that we use in our organization to do that. And sometimes it comes down to how often that material has been produced before in the same or other commercial settings. If it's a commodity product in a commodity environment that's been frequently produced before, there may be few questions to answer. Those are products that are perfect for mainstream production by large scale players who can produce at the lowest price.
Mm-hmm.
For those individuals and those organizations who are forced to compete on price, then they absolutely need a low cost producer because they're most likely surviving on limited margins.
Mm-hmm.
They either need a low cost producer or they need a partner who can help them create a differentiated product by adding value uh, by uh, by somehow advancing that product either further down the value chain or by creating a very differentiated version of the product that has unique capabilities. Those are two very different things.
Mm-hmm.
In our case, we have multiple production lines that are identical to one another except for their scale. They're orders of magnitude larger than the next smaller line, so that we can enjoy the economies of scale, but know that when we graduate up to the larger production lines, those products are going to run in an identical fashion to how they did on the smaller lines when they were produced before. And that allows us to do our rapid prototyping at the R&D level and know that once we've run them at the R&D scale, we can predict exactly how they're going to run all the way through large scale commercialization. And we have a history of taking projects from the benchtop to R&D to pilot to commercialization in 30 days.
Wow.
And we do not know of other organizations that can work that quickly, but also predict when they're at the bench top and the R&D level in that first week exactly what commercialization is going to look like. That is a tremendous advantage for any client who's looking to rapidly innovate and enter the market and compete with aggressive competitors. That applies whether they are competing with a known product or they're trying to innovate to compete or leapfrog competitors. If they're also trying to take a product that is based on a known ingredient but differentiate it, it adds tremendous value as well because it allows them to do the innovation as they go along and enter the market quickly, but find that differentiation at the same time and get into the market alongside those competitors or in front of those competitors just based upon the configuration of our manufacturing environment. But beyond that, there are a number of technical considerations in the manufacturing production lines that Hendrik can speak to.
Mm-hmm. And Hendrik,
Yeah,
just to,
absolutely.
if you need the question or if it's helpful at all, it's basically just how do I evaluate whether my contract spray drying company has the right equipment for the custom kind of unique powders that I have.
Absolutely. And so your product development partner or your CMO needs to understand that there are different processes involved when you create powders with very specific requirements. And that includes the liquid handling side, it includes the drying process itself, and then additional to that, also the powder handling. And all three of these processes need to be addressed, and the the development partner needs to showcase that he has access to that equipment and the latest equipment available in the market. And it again brings me back to what, and we'll briefly mention that, and that is the technology that we have, the dynamic atomization technology that can address the most important part of those three processes, which is the drying process itself and the ability to achieve these different powder requirements. And our technology is a proven technology that we have shown, multiple times in the past that we can achieve these unique powder requirements from customers.
Let me add something to that, Stephen. I think some of the criteria that you should apply when selecting a spray drying partner also include things like, what does the onboarding look like? What kind of expertise, like how many years has the company been in business? Are there case studies online? Can I find case studies on the website? Can I find testimonials? Is there an example in what the company does or has published in the past? Is there an example that is closely related to my objectives? It's always great when you have a situation where you're basically trying to solve a problem to see someone who says, yes, I have solved that problem in the past. Here is how we did it. And here is what the outcome was. So that to me is very important, because the idea that you are putting a valuable resource and financial resources into a partnership with the spray dryer, you want to trust them. Of course, you want to see the data. You want to see, their technology, but you also have to have a feeling that they've done this before. There's credibility. There is authority in terms of when they say this is going to work or this is not going to work, then, I have a reason to believe that that is the case. So those are some of the maybe not as technical factors that I would definitely look at in my search.
Yeah. There's another really interesting set of questions to ask to make sure that you're getting the right spray drying partner. One very common approach that clients or prospective clients take is simply to go with mainstream spray dryers because they're large and they've been in business and they've dealt with very large scale projects and they have a known name, and that's fine. Typically, those spray dryers have been successful drying commodity ingredients in high volume for mainstream markets. But the questions that the clients need to ask is whether or not their particular ingredients or their projects fit that model. So, for example, do my ingredients always have exactly the same particle size? And are they in that range that this client or this manufacturer can dry? Can they repeat that particle size in a narrow bandwidth? Yes or no? Can they repeat it every single time? Yes or no? What does the bell curve of those particles that are produced look like under this dryer? Is it wide or is it narrow? Can this dryer work with highly viscous materials? Yes or no? Is my particular ingredient highly viscous? Does it fit in their model? Yes or no? Can they work with very fragile ingredients? Is my ingredient too fragile for this particular spray dryer? Yes or no? Has this spray dryer worked with hundreds of different ingredients? Is mine outside of this typical range? Because many spray dryers cannot work with highly viscous materials. They cannot work with highly fragile materials. They cannot work with ingredients that need to be dried at very high heat for a very brief moment, like half a second, rather than going through the 25 or 30-second cycle of spray drying, because doing so would change the morphology of the particles and create a powder that won't work for the markets and the segments and the use case that the client has in mind. So the client who's asking this question about the equipment that they need for the spray dryer has to think about how that ingredient is going to perform on the equipment by asking these very specific questions about what that equipment is going to do to the ingredient, to the particles that come out of that equipment, and whether or not that powder is going to perform in the segments for the applications that the client and the company has in mind.
No, those are all great points. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I actually, it's funny, the way that you guys have answered these questions just by chance has actually led really well into the next ones. Because I think, Uli, I think you were talking even specifically about this, but I think, Uli, you were even talking specifically about this, but asking about not just the product, not just the actual specifications, but the people behind the organization, right? That's a huge part of it, because at the end of the day, you are working with people, and those people do have a track record, they do have abilities. So within that that first kind of stage of it, the question is, what should I expect during the initial consultation and sample testing phase with a toll spray drying manufacturer?
Yeah.
So the initial consultation normally happens over the phone or a video call with the customer. And as Will and Uli rightfully just discussed or mentioned all these questions, there's an array of questions that we go through with the customer. We first have to determine what is the product performance requirements, and then what is the business objective for the customers. And those two parts is very important, or very important parts of the discussion. Firstly, to determine, or the ability to determine, what are the product requirements. So that's with regards to the delivery system, the end product characteristics, and again, that's the flowability requirements, the particle size distribution requirements, the density requirements, and then we have to showcase our ability to achieve these requirements through the technology that we have on our side. At the same time, the medium to long-term objectives of the customer with regards to how soon do they want to commercialize the product, and in what way do they want to commercialize this product. And then again, back to what is the packaging requirements based on the delivery system requirements. That forms the initial consultation with the customer. We follow that up with a questionnaire where we address each one of these questions. In additional to that, it is questions, for example, like what is the certification requirements? Is it halal? Is it kosher? Is it organic? What GMP or other quality certifications do they require? And then obviously all of this is then combined into a document where we confirm what are the metrics and what are the quantitative and the qualitative metrics that we have to apply to make sure that we achieve these objectives, time and again. And we'll also mention that. So that's the ability to evaluate the product objectives, evaluate the product achievements that you have done on these different levels through the development work. Whether it's the small scale dryer and then scaling that up to the next, the medium sized dryer, the optimization trials, and then the scale up trials, and then obviously to commercialization. And you have to have the ability to prove to the customer that every single time you have achieved the original requirements with regards to the powder specifications, packaging specifications, liquid handling specifications, and then how are you going to achieve that every single time going forward. And once you achieve commercialization, that you again can achieve those requirements.
I want to add something to that, which I think is extremely important, not only in this particular spray drying context, but in general, which is, as a customer or a client or a partner of a spray drying organization or company, when you get ready for the initial consultation, it is extremely important to understand exactly what you want out of this process. It is probably the single most critical thing that you can bring, is a very clear understanding What do you want the final product to do, look like, feel like, how to perform under any given set of circumstances? And so the more specific a customer can be in putting forward these requirements or these asks, because ultimately, a spray dryer, be it Advanced Powder Dynamics or any other, is going to attempt to solve this customer's problem. The problem is I have something here and I need it to be transformed into this over here. And this end result over here, that has to be very, very well understood. And then we can basically backward think and backward develop. How do we make this input into this desired output? If there is no clarity on what the output exactly looks like, feels like, performs like, there will be many discussions in the meantime, and the team at every spray dryer company will be there to have those conversations. But these input requirements are so very, very important. I cannot overstate that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that that's just something that goes in general with the direction of any business, that you really do have to understand. And I think, Will, you talked about it a little bit. Hendrik, you talked about it a little bit. But the possibilities are so endless when you guys are doing, powderization in this way. When you guys are designing products in this way, you can really go so many different directions that you have to understand what your end goal is so that you can reverse engineer it, like you were talking about.
Yeah. Can I just maybe also hand it over to Hendrik again, because in your question there was also a little bit a question around sample testing. How does that look like? When are samples tested? In the initial conversation, like what does the testing protocol look like? I wanted to go back to the second part of your original question, Stephen, and maybe this is a good one for Hendrik because I don't really have the background for that. What does the sample testing protocol look like in an initial consultation or right when the process is started?
When we do the initial consultation with the customer, like I said, the questions that we'll ask will pertain to specific powder property and powder characteristic requirements. And then what is the ability of the product development partner to actually address those requirements. And if they don't have an in-house lab with the proper equipment to evaluate and test that, and those were the quantitative and qualitative measures that I was referring to earlier, you have to have the equipment in your lab so that you can do in-process testing, and that is in-process is during the product development phase, also on production scale. Do the proper testing so that you can evaluate whether you are achieving those results or not. And those specific things, again, refers to moisture content in the powder, water activity, flowability, particle size distribution, and so forth.
That makes sense. So the next question that we have here is, what are the typical lead times and minimum order quantities when working with a custom spray drying service provider?
I think Will answered some of that with previously, but basically what it is, the typical lead times ranges from a few weeks to several months, even to more than a year or maybe sometimes 2 years. It depends on the complexity and obviously the scale of the project. It depends on whether it's a current spray dried product or whether it's a completely new product with new formulation requirements. And unless the manufacturer or your development partner has the experience and the ability to take on a complete project or a complex project like this, it could take months and years for them to go through the development process. Will mention that we recently here at APD, due to the fact that we have a very comprehensive and robust development process, we took a new formulation requirement from a customer from the formulation development through initial lab tests, through pilot scale trials, through optimization trials, to scale-up demonstration, to commercialization level in 5 weeks. And the reason that we can do that is because we have the development process in place, and we have achieved this through the last 20 years and developed this through the last 20 years to achieve specific customer requirements. If a customer have long lead times, we can accommodate that. If a customer have, very specific short lead times, and they want to bring a product, to commercialization in a short time frame, we have the processes and the procedures in place to accomplish that.
Yeah, but it's interesting, Stephen. Your question is really, what are the lead times? And I'm reminded of, I think there's a book from decades ago of something to the effect of everything I needed to know I learned in kindergarten. It comes back to the concept of it. Work expands to fill the time allotted, and the reality is that people have been coached, including my companies. We're often told that we need 4 months to get you into a manufacturing slot, et cetera. It's very common. People are busy. Sure, companies are busy. Manufacturing environments are unpredictable. R&D teams and management teams, we have a lot on our plate. But the reality is it comes down to two things, and this is what people need to know. The time it takes to get something done is based on A, what is the actual capacity and capability of a partner to execute? And two, what is their willingness to execute within that capacity? Those are the only two things. What is their capability and what is their willingness? And, I've given examples before and Hendrik repeated them. We have taken people from concept through benchtop R&D pilot commercialization in 30 days. And
Wow.
we can do it again, we can do it regularly. But it really comes down to what is the willingness of a company to work within their means to move a new client through that pace quickly if they want to. And for that, the prospect, the client has to know exactly what they want. They have to have the intent to move forward quickly. They have to be willing to make decisions. They have to show that intent to their partner. I mean, no spray dryer, regardless of their capabilities, is going to make time for a client if they don't send the signals to the company that they are serious. And we get a lot of interest from companies that are not serious. And we have too many things to do to stop what we're doing and work with companies that are not serious. I mean, we talk to them, we spend time with them, but our message is, here's what we need to know. Please go figure it out. Come back when you're ready to do business. And then we engage with them. But we have a lot of people, that are lined up to have those conversations, and we spend our time with those who are serious, and then we move very rapidly. And yeah, we can do things that other companies can't. That's why they come to us. But the important thing is partnership takes intent from both sides. And once you find the partner that has the capabilities, has the equipment, that can move in a month or 2 months or whatever time frame you require, you have to know your market, know where you're going, know what product you want, know that the partner you're choosing can deliver on that. Otherwise, you shouldn't be approaching them because you're wasting your time and theirs, and you'll never get where you want to go within the time frame you have in mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, that's impressive though. 30 days of a turnaround for any manufacturing process that has any sort of, testing or anything like that in there is really, I mean, that's impressive, even if somebody knows exactly what they want
Yeah.
in a
And
lot
for
of
us,
industries.
that's Yeah, absolutely. And that's, testing all the raw materials coming in. That's evaluation of multiple potential source materials, so we understand how they're going to run with yields and so on at full
Hmm.
commercialization. That's soup to nuts. But the important thing is getting the absolute best product out of the end of the process. And that requires true partnership along the way, and it has to be a good match. And
Hmm.
again, it comes down to excellent communication starting at the very beginning. It's a rigorous process.
Yeah, it sounds like it. That's really cool though. So I think that you kind of spoke about this a little bit, or rather touched on it a little bit in the past, both Will and Hendrik. But I want to talk more specifically, and I know this is part of the reason I think why you guys originally got involved with each other, even. But how do toll spray drying companies ensure consistent batch to batch quality and maintain my product specifications?
From Yeah. I think firstly, most important is well communicated and agreed upon and proven processes and procedures. And those should be based on current regulatory requirements and other quality requirements, whether it's religious requirements or uh, global quality requirements. These things are essential, to start a product development process with. Also having the best dryer control systems and the latest drying technologies available for scaling and for repeating processes. If you don't have well documented and updated powder specifications and process setups and requirements to ensure that you are going to achieve this, and that you have the records that you can go back to and track these achievements, what you've done previously, then you won't know if you've achieved these requirements. APD, for example, have well-established quality based process and procedures in place. We have a well-established batch record system in place. So every time that we do a campaign for a customer, we have a recorded batch sheets that is based on the batching requirements and based on the formulation requirements from the customer, that is agreed upon with the customer. And we do this every single time. We don't start a campaign. However, how many times we've done it in the past, we will go back to the customer and we will confirm the exact requirements from the formulation side, from the blending and batching side, and then also from the powder characteristics and requirement side. And that is the transparency that we have, that is the open communication that we have with our customers, and that confirms that, that confirms that, yes, we will achieve those requirements every single time, regardless of what scale you are performing that production run on.
Mm-hmm. I think technology also plays a very important role here, Hendrik. So when I joined the company, I learned very quickly that in spray drying, and Will actually alluded to this in one of his earlier answers, there can be an enormous variance in the output material, meaning, you have from like the smallest to the largest particle in your finished powder can be a spread this wide or this wide or this wide, or one of the things that, dynamic atomization technology allows us to do is to have a very, very narrow band of control, what these particles look like, how they behave. So there is a very tight band in which the powder properties can be controlled, which is very important because ultimately all these properties of the powder then control how does it work in the production line for the finished product? Is it flowing properly through the, let's say, powdered beverage machines? Or is it compressible for tablets? Does it fill capsules properly? Can it be shipped easily? How is the moisture content? Moisture content is really interesting because moisture content has an enormous ramifications in terms of the weight of the product. So if you want to ship something from the US to the Far East, to Australia, to Latin America, you are always trying to minimize the size and the density and, of course, minimize the weight because that's very expensive to ship. And so I think that's really one of the important things is that this technology is on top of all the quality protocols, all the batch to batch measurements and the testing that goes on. But the technology in and of itself is a wonderful and incredible tool to minimize variance in the final product.
That's exactly right. And I think, what we're describing here is the layers and layers of capability that can go into the creation of sophisticated and successful products for a client, whether it's an APD project or it's another company that's producing outcomes for a client. What the client should look for is they should look for a partner who has tremendous experience building products that are sophisticated and refined powders. It starts with a history of successful production where the team that's doing it understands how to create a repeatable process, because the experience of the team is going to be the first line of defense in setting up and running successful projects with the
Yeah.
equipment they have. The second line of technology is the the technology and the intellectual property embedded in the production line. We have a very diverse and broad set of capabilities that extend beyond traditional spray drying, but regardless of the equipment, that equipment needs to be able to repeat the process to make identical particles time after time, every time that client shows up to the factory to create their product again. Because if they're successful, they're going to want to refresh that inventory every month or every 2 months or every 3 months. And they need that particle, that powder to be identical so that the market and their customers
Yeah.
appreciate that they're getting the same product every time they open a bottle or a canister or have a solution come to them from the market to the customer at the end of the day. And so they need to be able to set that machinery so that they're repeating the process with exactly the same configuration, the exact same nozzle settings, venturi pressure, port pressures, and everything is the same every time they run the production line. The control temperatures, the inlet settings, the outlet settings. Otherwise, the particles are going to differ, and that bell curve that Uli spoke about is never going to be repeated. The particles will never be the same. The product can never be the same for the client and for the customers, and they will not succeed in the market. So the technology and the production line is the second layer. But beyond that, um, our our production lines, like many, are software driven. When I show up to the factory, they might be running a third-party client product. They might be running one of my products. Maybe they're producing silox butyrate, which is the most advanced butyrate input powder for our on the market, and we use it to make one of our finished products. They can look at the software, and it's a real-time output of all of the elements that we've spoken about. So they know in real time what the commercial line or the pilot line is producing for all of the powder flowing through that machinery and coming out and being packaged. So they know as they're producing exactly what they're getting. And we
Mhm.
know that we're going to be happy with the powder coming out that line. And so the sophistication and the software management of the production line is very critical, because they can make real-time adjustments to the line and make sure that we're getting the results that we need. Ultimately, the fourth layer is the testing. We test the inputs rigorously along the way. We take samples during the testing. We're pulling them out of the production line as we produce. And they're also testing, of course, the finished product after the fact. Just like as a client, we test, our finished products before they go to market to assure safety, quality, all those things that we need for ourselves, for an audit trail, for the FDA, et cetera. But we don't wait until then. We're testing it as the manufacturer during the process. But we know from the results of the software that everything is being produced according to our specifications, the client specifications, and that tells us that the machinery is performing. And so, as a client looking for the right partner, you need to know that it's not just the people, it's not just the intellectual property in the technology of the production line, that there's great software management tools on top of that production line, that there are quality checks on top of those software tools. There's testing going along with it, so that by the time you're testing your product at the end of the day, all of those layers have been in place before then to create what you want to create for that finished product that you specified in that very first discussion when you came to your prospective partner to describe what you were trying to achieve.
Let me take that and build on that in a little bit of a different way, because one of the questions that we get a lot, Stephen, is should I make it or should I buy it? Right? If I'm a customer and I am looking for spray drying capabilities, I can either contract that out with a partner like Advanced Powder Dynamics, or I can actually consider doing it myself. And as I think we all kind of come to appreciate over the last hour in this conversation, it's an enormous amount of capital expenditure that stands behind this. So to build capabilities for customized or even, general mainstream spray towel drying is pretty substantial. You not only need the machines. The machines are a very large capex. You need the machines, you need the buildings to house them, you need the team to operate them, you need the expertise, you need the technology, you need the software, you need all the downstream elements, you need all the upstream elements, relationships with laboratories for the testing, relationships with ingredient manufacturers, you need an R&D lab, you need machinery for that. So, when people ask, is it smarter to make it or buy it? It's pretty obvious it is much, much more financially effective to buy it from a third party expert than to build it yourself and spend years and years and years acquiring the expertise and the knowledge and going through all of this. So in my opinion, how does that reduce my capital expenditure if I go to a spray dryer? Well, that's not even the first question is, do I want to make the product? Yes or no? If I do want to make the product, then I clearly want to buy the expertise to make it. Now, the other thing is, depending on who you end up drying your product with, the end product to a large extent will be controlling your working capital expenditure, meaning you spend a lot of money bringing ingredients to the spray drying company. Then it's even more valuable once it's finished. So then you have to put it in your warehouse or ship it to your manufacturing facility where it gets turned into a tablet, a capsule, a drink, a protein bar, a ceramic powder, anything. But this finished product that leaves Advanced Powder Dynamics represents a very large financial investment. So the longer your shelf life is, the easier it is to transport, the better it is performing in manufacturing. Those are all capital expenditure savings for the client down the road. They don't have to damage inventory out after a year because shelf life is probably 3 years or even longer. It's not as expensive to transport because the water is almost entirely gone, depending on the requirements. It flows easier. You have a lot less machine downtime. So that to me is one of my favorite questions, because it really brings to the forefront the value of, what these third party custom tool drying companies can provide.
Yeah. And I would I love that question. I would love to hear from Will and Hendrik as well a little bit, if you have an answer for that. But that question of how can contract spray drying help me reduce my capital equipment investment while maintaining product quality?
Well, first of all, if assuming that you have the right partner to provide the drawing resources on an outsourced and partnership basis, that has to be the baseline assumption because you need that quality from the partner. If you have the wrong partner, you won't get the quality. So let's control for that and set it to the side. On the question of the financial logic, I think Uli nailed it. It makes a lot of sense because you can eliminate the capex. That, though, is only one third of the value from a financial point of view. There are a lot of other fixed and semi-fixed costs that you can eliminate. Let's consider, for example, that you eliminate all the preventative maintenance costs. You eliminate the need to insure all that additional costs. You eliminate a lot of the factory overhead that would come from, the space required to have it, and so many other things that go around with maintaining, that equipment. You eliminate a lot of operating costs as well because you would have to maintain the staff to run that equipment. You would, frankly, most likely have a lot of downtime. So you would have unused capacity for that, most likely. Uh, you would probably want to launch other products over time to make use of that equipment. So then you have a situation where you would start by needing to invest in equipment if you wanted to make the capital expenditure, but you would be fine tuning equipment for one product or one product line, but eventually launching other products or product lines. And there's a question of two major issues. One is, can you maintain and even optimize your equipment to run separate products or separate product lines? And do you have the expertise to do that? Most people or most organizations then have additional operating costs if they're going to bring in that type of expertise in addition to the line or production staff to just do the operation of that equipment, because that's a different and more sophisticated group of people, because you're really bringing in R&D people in addition to the production staff, and you need additional capabilities on that line if you're going to run diversified set of products on that line. The second consideration is that equipment will need to advance over time if it's going to maintain its edge in the market. If you have a sophisticated external partner, they're going to keep their equipment leading edge if they're investing in the equipment, if they're sophisticated running and developing new products, if they're innovative, if they're worried about differentiation, if they're learning from all their other clients and developing their own IP. You don't have any of those advantages if you bring your equipment in-house. You're basically insular, and you lose track of market innovation if you're trying to do everything yourself. You simply cannot learn from the external environment unless you're constantly hiring people and bringing them in because you're poaching them from the outside environment. That can be extremely expensive. So there's the capex cost, there's the some fixed overhead costs which go into your cogs, and that gets extremely expensive, drives up your cost, reduces your margin, which is already under pressure if you're trying to do it yourself and you have to reach scale. And there's the burden on your standard operating cost and your expenses. So you really get penalized on all three, even though people just look at it as a capex cost, which gets amortized and expensed over time. It's much more painful than that.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's almost a similar vein of answer to kind of the first question, even of when you really look at it. Do you need something that custom? Do you need something that in-house? Do you need something that is even going to be that solution? Or, and if you do, it doesn't seem like the value is really there almost any of the time for a lot of these people.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to look at this from a financial perspective, and that lens is a very telling lens. Any CFO who, I mean, and I was CFO of a major company before, and I can tell you that lens alone is enough to probably make the decision. But when a CEO looks at this, the thing I would encourage CEOs to evaluate, putting the financial question aside, is the loss of opportunity that comes from the strategic discussions that can be had with the right partner.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have the right discussions with a strategic partner, the opportunities to learn and create entirely new products and entirely new revenue streams, that adds tremendous value. And if I'm a CEO coming to a partner with ideas to attack a marketplace, I don't want to just sit down with them and say, how can you dry my product and give me a price? The discussion I want to have is, how can we turn this idea into 5 products in a global market or an international market or in 3 or 4 different segments? And I'm depending upon them to be a partner to grow new revenue streams. I can't have that discussion with a handful of production operators in an internal department who are just running a machine. So the
Mm.
value that comes from the right partner is one that grows revenue and profits with good margin. It's not just how much does it cost to dry a product.
So I want to actually come back to that kind of same perspective, that CEO conversation, finding the right partner. We're going to come back to that on a future question. In the meantime, I do want to ask the question, while we're still kind of on the kind of technical product focused section of the questions, which is, what documentation and certifications should I require from a contract spray drying partner to meet my industry's regulatory standards? I know it's a really broad question.
I do want to get back to what Will and Uli just mentioned on the previous question. And what I would like to add to that is, we very often have to remind customers that product or product characteristics and requirements change. And they change because delivery systems change. The requirements for for different products and the delivery systems change continuously. There's new technologies based on the product requirements. And if your technology and you doesn't maintain that change or accommodate those product characteristic change requirements, and you don't have access to the engineering and the innovation, then you won't be able to keep up with the new product requirements and new formulation requirements. It's a very important factor that we always have to explain to our customers. If you don't have access to the latest technology, you don't have the ability to update your technology, and you don't have the engineering expertise to update that, you're going to sit with outdated technology that do not comply with your latest product requirements within a year or 2 years.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So
Let me answer your other question, and then I'll hand it over to Hendrik. So the question was, what kind of certifications should I be looking for in a spray drying partner? And Stephen, you already basically said it. It depends, right? Are you operating in a regulated industry? Meaning, are you in the food and beverage market, in the dietary supplement market, consumables, gummies, bars, whatever? Are you in the unregulated? Are you looking for ceramic powder to make tiles or, some building material? So it really depends on each industry, each market segment that uses powders drying in general is beholden to a different set of requirements legally, like the FDA, for example, or other regulatory bodies. Now, on top of that, you can layer consumer preferences that will basically drive who you are going to market to and who you are going to appeal to, which then brings in good manufacturing processes, GMP, and things like kosher, halal, organic. It really depends on what is baseline, what category are you in, what are the regulatory bodies that govern or do not govern your specific industry, and then what is the consumer appeal that you as a brand want to add on top of that. With advanced powder dynamics, we are in a very lucky position because we have them all. So most of powders, the spray dryers out there will have equipment that can run GMP, that can run halal, that run kosher. Many also have organic certifications. It really depends on what your objective is as a customer. But you have to make sure that whatever your final product is needs to achieve in the marketplace in terms of what we'll mention differentiation, who are you appealing to, and what does that target market require from you to believe that your claims are true. Those are the certifications that you should be looking for.
It's critically important to understand what those certification requirements are and what the market segment is. There's different requirements for infant formulations, for toddler formulations, for animal food or feed, for nutraceutical products, for pharmaceutical products. Each one of those have very specific regulatory requirements. Adding to that is label requirements. And if you don't have the knowledge or you don't have the certifications to comply with those, then obviously you're not going to satisfy the requirements for the customer. So it's important to understand what market is the customer targeting, what requirements or quality requirements is actually applicable to those segments, and then do you have that? And you need a partner that can advise you on what you would require. And again, that brings us back to the previous question. Buying or bringing your own production in-house requires a lot more than just having an operator to run the dryer for you. You need to have the expertise to make sure or to ensure that you do have the proper certification for each one of those different market segments. Uli was correctly saying that GMP is the most common one, but also staying up to date to the standard GMP requirements, halal, kosher, and organic certifications are almost a standard for all of these market segments currently.
Yeah, there's a great example that I like, but going back to Uli's summary and Hendrik's comments, I think every client should keep in mind a general rule. There are must-haves. Those are regulatory requirements. Those are things that are dictated to the market. Those are tickets to entry. You cannot, it should not be selling if you don't have those things. You will not succeed in the market if you don't have those things. Then there are nice to haves. Those are things that are commonly seen and appreciated by customer targets. Those are things that generally result in sales or failure to sell if a brand does not have them. And the example that comes to mind that I find very useful for a client to consider is I won't mention the company that did it, but they actually had two versions of a product. And the certification was an NSF for sport certification. So they maintained two versions of their product. It was a supplement product, one that had a label with NSF for sport, one that did not. They sold the one with an NSF for sport certification at a higher price, and the one that did not have the NSF for sports certification, obviously, at a lower price. The NSF for sport product required that each batch be tested. So there was a cost for the brand to maintain that certification. That's natural. That's good. NSF for sport provides a valuable service. And of course, they charge for that. Consumers, especially athletes, weekend warriors, etc., they value that. They're willing to pay for it. So the brand obviously sold a lot of those. But I found it interesting that the brand carried two versions of that product. And in particular, that they carried a version at a lower price that did not have the NSF for sport logo and certification. They did that because they recognized that there were many consumers who wanted that product, but did not want to pay for the NSF for sport certification. Now, my point is that clients should consider the value and the margin implication of these certifications. The ones that are nice to have are exactly that. They're nice to have. They're not must-haves. They're not requirements. The client needs to match those potential certifications to the market, to the value, to the finances of the business, and evaluate whether or not they need them or they don't and decide appropriately. And make sure that when they partner with their drawing partner, they're either paying for those things if they're advertised by the drawing partner, or potentially negotiating a discount and not paying for them just because the partner has them. They don't necessarily need them. Make sure that they're not paying for them if they're not going to use them.
That's a really, really great point. Because yeah, that understanding your customer, I think, is really where that ends up coming from, right? It's understanding the needs of the end user and really
Yep.
serving them, which is a really, I think, great perspective to come from. So this is, I think, honestly, within even that perspective of that kind of point of view of directing the ship, so to speak, and really serving your end customer, and kind of the same perspective that Will, you were talking about earlier, of you have the CFO conversation and then you have the CEO conversation. You have the, what's necessarily best for the operational side of things, but then what is best for the actual partnerships and the direction of the company overall. And assuming that we've kind of gone through all of these things, we've developed all of this both internally and with a partner. I think the question that seems obvious now is, how can I protect my intellectual property and formulation secrets when I'm outsourcing to a spray drying contract manufacturer, right?
Absolutely. It's important on both sides, actually, to have good documentation, good contracts, um, good paperwork in place to protect the intellectual property of both parties, both the entity that's doing the drawing and the client. So for our part, we have robust mutual NDA, and that protects us and our intellectual property because we work aggressively on behalf of our clients to make our intellectual property available to them, and it protects the intellectual property of the client. Our goal is always to work with them to create products, and sometimes that means putting our intellectual property together. So we clarify at the very beginning where that stands, both in the contribution of existing intellectual property and what happens if we create new intellectual property and who owns it and how it might be shared. And secondly, there's what's called an MTA, a material transfer agreement, because it requires that we're putting forward and sharing material with each other so that we can work together in our work streams from the R&D phase going forward. And so that protects us for things like no reverse engineering of material from each company and so on. But the good legal agreement that each party can see, review, edit, discuss, and agree to at the beginning before the companies get started is usually a sound and friendly way to establish that upfront.
Yeah. And did you guys have any additional thoughts on that, or all right?
It's very standard. You do a non-disclosure agreement, particularly when you work on the cusp of technology, and a material transfer agreement, and
Mm-hmm.
then everybody feels like they're protected. Ultimately, I can make the case, and I know this is not reality in many situations, but a relationship like this, where you're basically developing something together, you're solving a problem together, the spray drying company on behalf of its customers, there is really no upside to not having these agreements. And there is really no upside to trying to steal someone else's intellectual property. Because ultimately, and we'll get to that in a second when we talk about the question, what are key performance indicators?
Yeah.
You know, trust, transparency, open communication, that's invaluable. Like, that is something that you cannot even like express in monetary terms, because that really sets the baseline and the ability to develop something that's never been there before, or help a customer solve a problem quickly and effectively.
Yeah. No, that is a great tie-in, and I'm glad that you kind of brought up that perspective of this whole thing, because there is, again, I think you've brought it up on other questions in the past too. There's all the technical side, but then there's the human aspect of it, which is so important. So opening that question up to everyone now, how do I determine, or excuse me, so now opening that same question we were just talking about up to everyone, what are the key performance indicators that I should monitor when I'm evaluating the success of my contract spray drying partnership?
I would say there's always two sides. The one is the project performance, and then the other one is the product objectives. And you have to achieve both of those. From the project perspective, it is, have you achieved the time frame requirements specifically? And that is with regards to initial development stages, the scale up stages, and then how long did it take to commercialization. From the product perspectives, it is again referring back to what was originally agreed. What are the product requirements with regards to moisture content, particle size, flowability, density, but also very importantly is product yield. A customer with very high expectations for a high value product wants high yields. And that's a very important objective, is can you achieve the high yield time and time and again. The same with the powder or the product property requirements. And you have to evaluate both sides to determine whether you were successful or not. So with regards to the key performance indicator, I think Uli mentioned something that I agreed upon, and that is transparency, obviously access to the technology, the application of the technology with regards to your product objectives and requirements, and then very importantly, experience with regards to similar products, similar volume requirements, similar campaign requirements, and product requirements. And if you don't have experience in that, then obviously you're probably going to fail in that project.
I really like that distinction too, of just putting it into those buckets of project versus product.
Mhm.
It's a really helpful mindset.
Mhm.
Bill, what are your thoughts on that?
I think they are great buckets. I think ultimately the question is whether or not the product can be a success in the market. To some extent, that falls back on the client to see whether or not they set the right expectations when they were defining what they needed. We talked about how the client needed to be clear what they were trying to achieve. And so, whether we're talking about the product or the project meeting their respective goals, to a great extent, these targets are going to be set by the client when they come in to speak to their partner, their drawing partner. And so, what the drawing partner is trying to do is help that client bring things full circle back to the objectives they set. If that works, then hopefully that client is successful in the market with their product and they're rewarded, with the clients they're trying to achieve. And generally, what we try to do as the best drawing partner is then take them to the next level once they hit the market. Once we get that feedback, we look for opportunities to further differentiate that product and potentially other products in the market with them. It's a living, breathing relationship that goes on over time. Once we start getting the market feedback, the question becomes, how can we do more? How can we grow this product? What do we learn from the market once we get more feedback from those first and additional clients? And then what can we do to branch out and do more, whether that's additional segments of the same market or it's totally different markets, potentially international markets. And we see with a lot of our clients that when Hendrik and I sit down with them, they come to the factory and we have dinner with them, the first night or so on when they're doing campaigns. The discussion we always have is, how can we help you grow the business? What other opportunities are there given the markets you're in? And I would say 75 to 80% of them, they leave those dinners with lots of ideas. And so as long as we hit the product targets, we hit the project targets, and we launch successfully with those campaigns and getting those products into the market, generally what we do from there is we set the next round of targets. So success comes from staying on track with the product and the projects, but then getting that feedback from the market to make sure that as a corporation, they are hitting their objectives with their markets so that they build their brand. And then they can do more because they're all stepping stones.
Mm. That's a really cool perspective on that question. Thank you for that. The last question that I have is a little bit of a shift. We've come at so many of these questions from the perspectives of when you're looking for a spray drying partner, or when you're kind of in the market for it, or what you should be looking for from a new partner, or whether you should do it in house. But this one actually comes from, I think, a perspective that a lot of the possible people listening are, which is when you already have a partner or you're already using a current manufacturer, which is, I think, going to be really helpful. So the question is essentially, how do I determine if my current spray drying supplier is meeting industry standards, industry best practices, and when should I consider switching providers?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to this. I'll let Hendrik and Uli start, but the two sides of this really are based on one central premise. Industries and markets are always in motion. And that means that you always see businesses that are moving up and you see businesses that are moving down. That's just the reality of competitive dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, we can talk to you about what a client should keep their eyes open for if they're worried that their partners might be moving down and losing traction, either because their platforms, their facilities, their production equipment, their people are on the decline, and that would be worrisome. Or there might be things that would motivate a client to move to a different firm if they see other partners that might be better, because those other partners are on the upswing, either because
Mm-hmm.
of technologies or ideas or differentiation or intellectual property or adoption of capabilities that others in the other first category might be slow to adopt.
Yeah. I think one of the things that, and it kind of goes back to to something Will was talking about, and it's more in the people area, which is willingness, capabilities and willingness. If you at any point in time get the sense that your spray drying partner is no longer willing to help you solve a problem or advance a project or focus the company's resources on achieving your objectives, I think that's definitely a red flag. The other thing that I think is important, any kind of manufacturing partner should always be open to have a customer come in and audit. Assuming that the relationship is built on collaboration and achieving mutual objectives, then it shouldn't really ever feel like someone's gonna try to get you, oh, I saw something over there. I saw something over there. I'm gonna try to get my price lowered. It really should be, there should be a welcoming atmosphere at the manufacturing partner or at the spray drying partner to have customers visit, see the facility, see the lab, see the machines in action if they're interested in doing so. So if you work with if you work with a company that is not really open to any of that, I think that's another red flag where transparency is super important. They are one piece of the value chain in your product that eventually will get used by a consumer in one way, shape, or form. And so I think that's important. If you see increasingly bad customer reviews, I mean, everything is online right now. If you see increasingly poor customer reviews, I think that's worrisome. if there is a lack of documentation, a lack of making particular documents available, I think that's another red flag. Hendrik, you probably have another 30 examples.
Yeah, I was just thinking, Uli, you addressed most of the questions or the answers. One thing that I agree with you absolutely, and that is the level of transparency. If your contract manufacturer or your product development partner is not 100% transparent, then something is off. So that is with regards to site visits. At APD, we always invite the customer to our site. We take them through the complete process from beginning till end. We walk the processes with them from the logistical side, from the receiving side, right through to the development side, the production side, the packaging side, the powder handling side, and everything, and then back to warehousing and logistics. It's very important that the customer are comfortable with each one of these processes and how to handle them. And then one thing that is very important for me personally, I look at the website and I look at your LinkedIn profile. And if you don't have an updated website that complies to the latest trends and latest technology, it shows activity on your website. Sorry for that. If you don't have an updated website and there's no customer interaction on your website, then that is questionable.
So I think what we've described here is sort of back to this concept of the must-haves and the nice-to-haves. If a client must have something like a certain certification, um, and obviously one of the things a client must have, whether they know it or not, is they must have an audit trail of certain documentation. They must have production records. They must have all of the paperwork that goes with, the C of A of material coming in and so on for almost every campaign, unless they're in an unusual circumstance. Things like that, then it's probably time for them to find another partner if their partner cannot provide those things or no longer provide those things. And then there's the category of the nice to haves. If there are things that would be nice to have, but they're not comfortable that they're getting those things from their partner, then they have to evaluate, are they uncomfortable enough that they should consider moving on? And then it becomes a question, are they enticed to go with one of the rising partners in the field? And then it's just a matter of the competitive landscape providing alternatives that suddenly look pretty good to them compared to how things were when they evaluated them before. From our point of view, we make decisions like that with vendors and partners every day, and it's not unusual for them to go through those evaluations. As a very competitive player in the drying space, we try to do things that are so differentiated that it makes it very easy for a client to make those decisions. But most drying companies don't have it so easy, and it can be very difficult, particularly for those clients who are drying a commodity product. There, I think they're just moving back and forth between players who, in many cases, often look the same. And if they're making a decision just on a couple of cents, per pound or per kilogram on a dried product, then it's a lot of work moving back and forth between clients and creating new relationships and accounts for uncertainty. And it's not always easy to make that decision. For us, we choose to concentrate on things that we believe no one else is doing. We believe that things like the use of cyclodextrin inclusions makes a major difference in many ingredients where cyclodextrin inclusions can be deployed, particularly if you're in food, beverage, or nutraceuticals, where those things can make a considerable difference for neutralizing unfavorable taste or odor, or creating dissolution in liquid where solubility is a great concern. And we know unequivocally that the dynamic atomization technology, which we use and is not deployed in the rest of the marketplace, is uniquely suited for that, and spray drying in the rest of the market cannot do, makes us the only dryer that should be chosen by clients in most cases. But that's just us. I mean, for the most part, clients have very different considerations that they're going to be taking into account, and they really have to weigh whether or not the choice to move is going to be worth that move, and whether or not it's going to impact their margin, whether it's going to disrupt their supply chain, whether it's going to change the timing of their material throughput time in their
Hmm.
overall manufacturing model, and so on, and whether or not they're going to impact multiple SKUs, not just one or maybe two products. For some that have very complex inventories and inventory systems, it can be a real headache. So it can be a major decision.
All right. Well, sweet. That's a great last
So
answer to our last question. Um,
I
I
have
think
to
this has
have to
been
let the puppy out.
oh good.
The only quick thing I have is we did not do any sort of introductions or anything at the beginning. I don't know if that's necessary or not. How do you want to deal with that in general now
I
and in
mean,
future recordings?
we can go about it however you guys want. We could even do introductions now, and I can just put those at the beginning for this one. It can go again, kind of however you want it to go. If you'd
Yeah,
like it
and
to kind of be like that format of things where we introduce everyone and you say a little bit about yourself, I'm happy to just do that now and put that at the beginning. If not, then
w-
I
well,
wonder, Stephen, because we're going to do so many of these,
hmm
um,
yeah, I'm not
wouldn't
even arguing that we need to do one. I'm saying that you could even put just like we can stick with names, you could
caption.
stick name and title, you can do whatever you want to do. We don't I'm not saying we need formal introduction. I'm just curious how we want to handle it. Um so like we've got, Hendrik, I see Hendrik in his frame there, but somebody's going to want to know who is this person talking, in the video.
yeah. Well, let's I think what I can do is within the captions, I can actually
Yeah.
just title them. But
Okay.
let's do really quick little introductions, just here, and then I'll just put this whole little clip from here at the very beginning of it. Does that
But
work
are
for you
you going to
guys?
put it at the very beginning of each of these recording things that we're
No,
doing? Oh,
no. I mean, I'm gonna see if I can have it just attached permanently to like name and title, to each of the captions, um, which I believe I may be able to do. I haven't done it before though, so it might only be at the beginning. Um, but in the overall long format of it is where it would show up. So I think what we can do is say um, I'll just say something like if you guys want to introduce yourselves and give what you do here at APD, I think that'd be helpful for just show the perspective. And then if you want to just do really brief, like a couple sentences, I run this point of view, or I run this part of the program, and so people understand where the perspectives are coming from. I think they show through, but I think it would be useful. So I'll just start that now. Is that cool with you guys?
sure.
Cool.
Yeah, I think probably maybe just like name and title. I mean, I'll just say it's, Will West, founder and co-founder and CEO of Tesseract Life Sciences, which happens to be the owner of Advanced Powder Dynamics.
Okay. Cool. All right. So I'm gonna introduce that now.